your pal 6-Speed here. Today we're working on yours truly 6-Speed Dakota. Anyway, this is part one of what I like to call the Dakota refresh. Oh lordy. We're kind of going through everything. I toyed with the notion of buying a new truck or a newer Ram. At almost $40,000 at the end of the day, I just don't have that kind of money to throw around, and financing, yeah, I could do it, but you know, then I'll have nothing to show for. And on top of that, housing here in the Vancouver area is very, very expensive. So that's kind of the priority of what we're saving up for. So we're going to keep this guy alive a little longer and kind of fixing what's wrong with it. Now, today we're doing the lower ball joints, and usually I would recommend doing everything at once. I'm going up to Christina Lake in about 2 weeks' time, and I just don't have the time to do everything and have it aligned. So we're just fixing what it needs. So we're also going to do a basic tire rotation, clean the brakes out. I don't need to film that. Just get some of the general maintenance up to date on it. At the end of the day, we're going to need, I think it needs new clutch packs in the rear differential, struts, and I may as well just replace the upper ball joints and the tie rods because the steering rack's leaking. Nothing is really too worn out except for the lower ball joints. So we're going to fix that now. So let's get started. So let me preface this by saying this. If you're not mechanically confident enough to do this, don't do it. Because this takes a whole load of the vehicle. This one little part. So if you mess this up, you're probably going to be stuck on the side of the road with a truck that's written off. So, like I said, it's fairly simple, but unless you have a fairly decent mechanical savvy, just please don't do it. Okay, so we're going to go over the laundry list of stuff you're going to need. So you're probably going to want some penetrating fluid. You need an 1 3/8" socket. This is a 3/4 drive. And I've also popped the center cap out and actually loosened that nut off. You are going to need a 10mm socket, a 3/8 wrench for the Zerk fitting. You're going to need a 7/8 socket, also to get the wheels off and stuff like that. I like my good old pair of channel locks, comes in real handy. Breaker bar might be useful. You're going to need a set of snap ring pliers. You can also use a big screwdriver. If you do not have them, you can actually get away with that. We're going to use Mjolnir here, or Thor's hammer. And you need a ball joint service set. I bought this guy on Amazon for about 35 bucks US. So it's actually reasonably cheap. So that was actually a really good buy, and this is actually a really good set. I've done the other side, and it went like a breeze. So got the fingers crossed here that it's going to work out. Anyway, my battery's about to die for whatever reason, so I'm going to start by removing the wheel. So step one is actually to pop the center cap out, whether you want to pull the wheel off and try and pop it out, or try to dig a screwdriver in there. Just be careful you don't mark the wheel. Do that at your own risk. And crack this guy loose with the weight of the vehicle on it, because this guy is tight, like really, really tight. So kind of before we start, let's talk about what are the symptoms of a bad ball joint. Number one, you're going to notice the vehicle's very sloppy. It wanders all over the road. You might have a little sloppiness in your steering. That might also be accompanied with other front end components that are worn out. They're fairly easy to check, so let's go and check them. So what you need to do is get your jack and put it on the lower control arm until the weight of the vehicle is fully resting on it. And what this will do is this will take the load off of our ball joints, or our lower ball joint. The lower ball joint is called the load-bearing ball joint. And now what you want to do, just ignore the big puddle of transmission fluid. I know my steering rack is leaking. It's just the boots all full up with fluid. And we're going to take a bar underneath it and pull up. It's kind of hard to tell right now. There we are. You hear that? That is a very, very badly worn lower ball joint. Okay, so after we got the wheel off, we're going to yank the CV shaft, CV shaft nut out. Just in case you're wondering, I'm actually draining the steering rack boot of all the fluid that's in it, so it doesn't leak out as drastically as, it's not as bad as it looks. It's just once it gets full, it appears to look like it's leaking everywhere. And then as soon as I empty, it won't leak for another couple months. Now, again, to preface this, this is a fairly new CV shaft. Like, I put it in August, beginning of August, so it shouldn't fight us too much, and I just pushed it the rest of the way in, so that's a plus. The other side came off really easily too. Okay, so now we're going to look up a bit. So some people like to take the caliper mounting bracket off with the caliper. I can't really reach in there and do that. So wherever I put my wrench would be nice. So we're going to take our 13 mil. We're going to loosen the 2 caliper bolts. Oops. Sometimes these guys like to randomly shift back and forth. So take our upper and lower caliper bolts off. Loosen them both before you remove them. Put my bolts over there. Now, whatever you do, do not let that caliper hang by the hose. You shouldn't do it with a normal car, but the fact that this has got a big, heavy caliper on it, made out of cast iron, it's probably not the best idea. So, we may need our screwdriver here to pull the pistons back a little. Oops. I don't know why this guy likes to get hung up. Okay, so now we're going to flip it around and sit it down on the control arm. You can tell my brake pads are nice and shiny and new. It's because I just put them in not all that long ago. I think that was maybe July or June. So we're going to take our 21 mil wrench. Man, that thing's really in there. I've also got the key in the unlock position. Not on, but the first position before lock. And that allows me to swing the steering knuckle back and forth. I used to put anti-seize on these until I had one come loose on me. Not on this truck, but on another person's vehicle. My in-laws, to be specific. That was a little embarrassing, so sometimes if I feel like it, I'll actually use Loctite on these bolts. Looks like we're going to have to give these sliders some grease. I'll have to excuse the rather inclement weather out here. It was snowing back at home and about 30 miles away at my parents' house, which is where we are now. It's much lower. And it's just raining. So we'll put our bolts over there. Man, there's a lot of threads in these things and they don't like to come out. Okay, set our caliper mounting bracket aside. We'll bring our knuckle back to straight again. Remove the rotor. Okay. Okay, so that CV shaft is nice and loose. definitely a plus. So what I like to start with is up here, right there at the upper ball joint. That is a 21 millimeter. The factory ones are lock nuts. They don't require a cotter pin. The Moog ones have a cotter pin in them. Personally, I like the lock nuts better because there's one less thing you have to worry about. Now be aware, when you order your new ball joints, if you get the Moog Problem Solver ones, they look totally different. So do not be alarmed. It's actually a much better design. Now I just like loosening these for right now. Not actually removing the ball joint itself, and you'll see why in a second. May just want to leave that nut on a couple threads. Now we're going to go to the tie rod over here on the left and loosen it off. We're working on the driver's side, by the way, just in case anybody was wondering. Might need to add a little bit of lube to this. It is a little bit tight. That's a little better. Oh man, this thing's a little tight. This is the secret mixture of acetone and transmission fluid. It works surprisingly well. Now, in case you're wondering, I don't have my compressor with me, as the inclement weather has stopped me from bringing it. I would rather not it get soaked on the way here and wreck the pump. Okay, so now we're going to take our BFH. So right here is our tie rod. And how we get these buggers loose, we're going to hit it right here where the knuckle comes through. There we go. It should just pop right loose. Just like that. That went easier than the other side did. Now, another thing I should recommend is putting a jack under the lower control arm, because the spring is going to want to push it back down again. So we want to make sure that that thing's not going to go flying off into oblivion. Uh-oh. I might have shot myself in the foot here. Oh, maybe not. There we are. Now keep that nut. That nut is important. There's our tie rod. Nice and loose. And we'll do the same thing to the upper ball joint. Do not hit the stud. That is the number one thing. Do not hit the stud. Doesn't matter if you're not replacing it, or if you are replacing it, because what if you run into a situation and for some reason maybe you got the wrong part or something, I don't know. There we are. There's our steering knuckle loose, held on only by our dreaded lower ball joint. So as you can see right here is our lower ball joint nut. That is actually a 24 mil. think I'm turning it the wrong way. That's because I am. Oh, this thing's going to be a real pain to break loose. I might just jump to this thing being off. It's not coming off. Alright, so now that we got our nut off the lower, all we're going to do, now there's a reason we left the CV shaft in there. And that's because it's going to quote unquote catch, I would hope, it's going to catch the knuckle when it falls. Seemed easier on the other side for whatever reason. Oh, my ears are ringing. Oh, don't try this at home, kids. You gotta be shitting me. Come on. I hope I don't need a fork for this. Oh. So it's definitely not as easy as the other side. There we go. Now that my ears have really started to ring, it finally comes out. Oh, Christ. I hope I didn't wrench this. Oh, there we go. We're good. Okay. Holy crap. We're going to kind of set our CV axle aside. Oh, my ears are ringing like you wouldn't believe. Set our knuckle aside. I have a feeling this one's going to be fun. Okay, so right here's our upper ball joint, or lower ball joint, sorry. And as you can see, we have this stupid little circlip on here. So we're going to use our snap ring pliers, and it's going to fly off at my face. Alright. So now comes the fun part. So we got to get this thing out. So what I start by doing, or what, is we're going to apply a little penetrating lubricant to this side and help it soak in. We take our hammer. Alright, I don't know if you can see that, but now we got a gap here. And now this guy's flush with the surface. Okay, so now what we have to do is we take our ball joint service kit and we use, in this case we need the biggest cup. That fits completely over the ball joint. The next one down actually catches on the rim. So unfortunately this is not super ideal, but because we got the thing to move, we're not really up the creek, so that's a plus. Okay, so we're going to take this little guy here, which has a bunch of steps on it. And that's going to locate that guy. And we're going to have no end on this, just this regular old rotating tip that it comes with. We're going to tighten it till it's flush. I'm going to give the threads a shot of oil here. Now we take our 7/8. Uh-oh, slid off. Our 7/8 socket. and push. That little crack is a good sign. There she goes. So you can see, as I turn, it goes further through. And once we get right to the end, she should just drop. There we are. I could feel it coming loose beforehand here. Ouch, Jesus, that was my finger. Yeah, watch your finger. Don't learn the hard way like I do all the time. So we'll pull our tool out of here. And here is our old ball joint. You can really tell it's got a lot of slop in it. Also, this guy moves around really easily. The tie rods do a little bit. They feel reasonably tight. And so does the ball joint. They've probably got some wear on them, but they're not shot yet, so that's a plus. Now, just going to make sure that this hole is really, really clean because we don't want to press any grit back into it. And we'll move on to the next step, which is going to be pressing the new one back in. Okay, so this is what comes in the new kit. We have a little baggie of hardware, which has a snap ring, has a grease zerk, and it has a cotter pin and the castle nut and everything you need to put this bad boy in. Perfect. And we have the ball joint. Now, as you can see, this thing looks totally different than this. That is correct, though. See, this guy has this tiny little grease boot here. This is a hell of a lot harder to move than that one. Notice we have a bit of a knurling on this. So that's to hold it in place. Now, you got to look closely at the boot, and there will be a little arrow that says, so that's right here, you probably cannot see it, it says mount inboard. And how I remember this is I line this up with whatever letter here on the top. In this case, it's lined up with the S in solver for the problem solver. Okay, so now pressing it in is a little bit different. So we want to get our tightest fitting one that fits over the boot, which is going to be this guy. Notice our ball stud hangs out the bottom? That's fine, that's totally normal. Now, a lot of people think you've got to reverse the tool. In some cases you may be correct, but in this case that would be wrong. We don't want to reverse our tool here. So we want to get the specific piece that sits on the bottom of this, just like that. And then we want to get, so we got this like that. So this guy's going to go on the bottom of the C. And this guy here is the cap. You want the cap to go over top of the ball joint so that it cannot touch the sides. This is going to go on top. This is a little bit tricky, especially to get it all lined up into place. So I got the S pointed inboard. Now all that is, that's just the grease outlet. So when you grease it, crap. So when you grease it, it doesn't puke into the wheel. Which would be bad. We don't want that. Okay, let's try that again. So we got our thing pointed inwards. This on here like that. I gotta loosen this thing right off. Pretty much flat. Honestly, for an Amazon buy, this thing wasn't that bad. It's actually a pretty good set, considering the fact that most of these go for close to $300 Canadian anyway. The $35 buy wasn't so bad. I was paying exchange rate on top of that, but hell, even with the exchange rate, it was a hell of a lot cheaper than anything that was here. So, oh, there we go. Make sure your ball joint is properly seated in the hole. And I'm going to index it. Or slip that guy on there. And we want our, there we are. There we go. Put a little oil on the threads. Starting to run out here. And we're going to take our 7/8 again, set in, tighten. As you can see, we're drawing the ball joint back up into the hole. Oh man, it's a lot harder to put them back in, believe it or not, than it is to take them out. I'm actually genuinely surprised it took as little force as it did to pull it out. I was really worried they were seized in there. So basically you want to keep rotating this thing till you can't anymore. I got a cheater pipe on top of this thing. Looks like we're approaching home. And you're going to feel when the tool starts to get stiff. You want to stop at that point because you're fully seated. Now, oh man. Shouldn't have done that with a breaker bar. We're going to loosen our tool off. Oh, that is annoying. Alright, there we are. That's the hardest part of it all done. And our grease bleed is vented inwards. Then I can take this guy apart. So, this tool is actually kind of unique. Comes with its own carrying case, which is nice. I don't know if other ones do this. You can use this thing for U-joints. You don't even need a cup for it. And this one slides in through the opposite end and threads in. And what this does is makes it super easy to store in the case, which is awesome. We love easy. Okay, so next step we're going to put our I haven't even opened it yet. Snap ring in. Now be aware that there is a gap. All this snap ring is supposed to do is if in the event of an emergency and this thing got ripped out of there, the snap ring is going to prevent it from pulling right out. So basically it's only if Armageddon happens. So when you get it set into the groove, you should be able to spin it easily. Just like that. So now, the last thing we need to do before we start putting everything back together again is we need to put the grease zerk in. You could put it in after, but it's so much easier. Oops, sorry everyone. So much easier to do this without the steering knuckle in place. So this is our 3/8 wrench that we need. Now this hole isn't tapped super well. We're going to get it reasonably far in there. Don't have to tighten it right till it bottoms out. I might go another turn on this. And at the end of it, I want this grease nipple facing forward. Just like that. So I can easily get the grease gun in here. And if I need to, I can turn the steering wheel one way or the other. And now, before I get too carried away here, I say that probably the best thing right now, because you don't know how long these parts have been sitting on the shelves and if they even put much grease in them to begin with. These lowers have all of the Moog problem solvers have a powdered metal gusher bushing inside there. Oops. All the Moog problem solvers have a powdered metal gusher bushing is what it's called. Powdered metal is is exactly what it sounds like. It's metal that's in a powder and is pressed into a mold and heated at a high temperature. So the is heated at a high temperature so that the so that it holds its shape. Oh, you son of a, get in there. There we go. Got our steering rack boot reinstalled after we finished draining probably about 6 ounces from it. Okay, so the very last thing we got to do before we start installing things, because it's easy to get at right now, we're going to take our grease gun and we're going to grease it. Now we don't need to put a lot in it, just until you hear it kind of start to fart a little bit. I hear it. There we are. And I also replaced the sway bar links about 1.5 years ago, and they have a grease fitting on them. So, when in Rome, this thing hasn't been shot up with much grease in a while. It's probably a good thing we gave them a... So the powdered metal actually retains the lubricant very well, which also increases its life. So even if your grease dries up, it's still going to retain some of the lubricant. So, now what we need to do is put our knuckle back in. Line up our CV and our lower ball joint at the same time. And then we get our nut threaded into the bottom as quick as we possibly can, so that it does not fall out, because that would suck big time. Now this is 7/8. Just gonna pull her up home. So, down here we got our castellated lock nut. Okay, so now for the slightly tricky part. Now, if you come this far, it's not so bad. We gotta find our hole for the cotter pin. So once we get it reasonably tight, we gotta line up the lock nut to the hole, which is pretty much right there. Not sure if you can see it, but there's our castellated lock nut. Focus. The reason they call it a castellated lock nut is because it looks like the top of a castle. And in the inside there, oops, on the inside here is our hole for the cotter pin. So we slide our cotter pin in. Now this is so small I can bend it by hand. That's all we need. I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to bend it the other way, because knowing my luck I'm going to catch myself on it and hurt myself. Alright, so this part up here is a little tricky. So what we need to do, I got a jack under the control arm to kind of lift it up a little. Doesn't seem to be lifting up by much, which is a bit of a pain in the butt. There we go. So we got the nut on up top here. Man, this is really winding me today, isn't it? Now, crap. We're going to have to start tightening it up. Now what you're probably going to eventually find is when it gets down to the nylock, that the stud's going to spin, kind of like it is right now. So that's when you take your 10 mil wrench. Now this is a little counterintuitive. Make sure it's in left hand and loosen. And what you're doing is you're actually spinning the stud and pulling it down into the knuckle. Luckily this one has that, not everyone has that. It's kind of required if you're using a lock nut. And this one will be left to weld itself in there. Make sure this one's good and tight. Oh. Last one's this guy right here, the tie rod. Tie rod comes from underneath, and again uses the same bolt or same nut that it came off with. You'll probably end up having to do the same thing with this. Yeah, I think we're going to have to. But oh, and you notice, I'm not sure if you noticed, but I loosely threaded that nut back on. We're going to have to give it the final tightening when it's inside, or when it's down on the ground again. But I still got to rotate the tires and service the brakes in the back. So we got a ways to go before that. So, give it the final tightening, make sure it's good and tight. And same thing with the ball joint. Oops, that's loosened. Alright, so that wasn't so hard actually. I was really nervous about this. I can try spin this on a little, but since that mechanical lock nut is on there, I'm sure that it's not going to offer us up much. Let's put the brakes back on. So, take our, oh my god, man, when you got a good quality OE rotor, those suckers are heavy. Holy cow. Alright, so we're going to remount our caliper mounting bracket. These are 21mm bolts. And am I glad these are done. So the other thing I did was lubricated the friction points with a little bit of anti-seize, and clean the sliders out and lube them up with a little bit of silicone grease, or what we call high temperature brake grease. Need more of it. Alright, so we're going to put our pads back in, nice and thick because they are fairly new. I put Raybestos Element 3s in them, and I absolutely love them from the first time I mashed the pedal. These beat the crap out of the stalkers every time. Definitely worth the extra money. Alright, so the last step, once we got the brakes on, is to get this nut done back up. So now you see I got my big bar that's wedged to the concrete here. We'll just get it good and tight. That's it. All we have to do is toss the wheel back on and we're all done. So, that actually wasn't as hard as I thought. It takes the wind out of you though. Anywho, holy crap. Ugh. Well, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Awfully dirty. I can see that there's a good mark on my... Oh, no, maybe that's my scar. Yeah. Not a fun job particularly, but not super difficult, especially when it comes off easily enough. I just got to rotate the tires, service the brakes, the general BS that needs to be done that I've been neglecting for a long time. So, don't need to bore you with that, but hope you enjoyed this video. Hope now that you feel a little bit more confident if you want to change your own ball joints. Follow me, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at 6Speed Dakota, and if you haven't already done so, please subscribe, and take it easy, everyone.